I see some familiar names from the first session and some new names as well. So if you're new, welcome. My name is Rajvi Bhatia. I work for TNTP. And just to give you a little bit of context, in the first session, Science of Reading 101, we discussed the brain science behind how kiddos learn to read, and then just started talking about what strong instruction might look like in practice. So we're just going to recap our objectives for our time together this morning. And again, we're going to focus really in on that second and third objective here on the screen. What does strong reading foundational skills instruction look like in practice? And what actions can we take to ensure that students we serve receive equitable instruction? All right, we got a lot to cover. These hours move quickly. So I'm going to take a minute to read the poem that you see on the slide. I want you to think about what makes reading this poem amusing, and think about how might this poem be challenging to read even as proficient readers. So think about that. So when you begin to pull apart the complexities of English, it's a wonder how our brains manage to organize all of these phoneme and grapheme pairs, let alone be able to access them almost instantaneously. So we ended the last session talking about a need for explicit and systematic instruction, and this just reinforces that. So I want you to think about, go to the next slide. How does this poem illustrate the complexities of the English language? And what might be the implications for multilingual learners and students with learning and thinking differences? I'm going to give you a minute for independent reflection, and then I would love one or two folks to come off of mute and share what they're thinking in terms of reading that poem and how we might be thinking a little differently about some of our students and how they access that. Feel free to also add your thoughts to the chat here. Anyone willing to kick us off and share what they're thinking? Vocabulary knowledge plays such a big part in learning. Thanks, Elizabeth. Language is based on so many other languages, which impacts spelling, pronunciation, and meaning, definitely. Thanks, Michelle.
This poem helps me really make the connection with how important knowledge is, because I could read fluently pretty easily, but my brain would take like a pause to figure out the representation of that word, if that makes sense. So if I didn't have the knowledge of the word, none of it would have made any sense.
Thanks for sharing, Sarah. Let me see some folks are agreeing with you in the chat. So I just did that exercise to just think about what our kids might be experiencing if some of those pathways that we talked about in the first session aren't developing correctly. So excellent reading foundational skills instruction always includes aligned content, explicit teacher-directed instruction, sufficient practice, both in and out of context, and then assessment and differentiation to support mastery. In fluency instruction, this means focusing on wordless and decodable text aligned to targeted skills with your earlier readers and progressing to more complex text later in their development. This is followed by repeated reads of a single text to build automaticity, accuracy, and prosody, and give students corrective feedback in the moment. I'm going to pause for a minute so you have some time to read what's on the slide. We're going to zoom in on what these components actually look like. So there's a train of thought in teaching reading that the English language isn't regular and it's too complicated to teach systematically. So why do we need to teach phonics? And the reality is that English is extremely complicated. Here you can see that we have 44 unique sounds, 150 different spellings, 52 letters of the alphabet. That's complicated. But what we know about the brain science of learning to read means that the only way for students to efficiently learn to crack the code is systematic and explicit instruction on the sound, letters, and spellings that make up language. Take a look at this chart here. The first component in instruction being systematic, students are taught reading foundational skills in a specific sequence that supports them through the progression of typical reading development. Although students' neural pathways develop at different rates and require different amounts of practice to strengthen, all students develop the same pathways and they all pass through the same phases to move from their natural oral language abilities to become fluent readers. Here you see Aries phases of development, and Ari codified those stages, and they help immensely in deeply understanding not just what instruction should look like for all students, but also where students might get stuck in their development and what I'm getting tongue-tied here, what interventions to offer those students to support their reading growth. So we see strong instructional sequence supports students to move through the stages here. For example, a student starts working on phonemic awareness in pre-K, since they're usually in the pre-alphabetic stage. Then we add in phonics instruction with single consonant and vowel sounds starting around kindergarten, when most students enter the partial alphabetic stage. Then we focus on more complicated phonemes like blends and digraphs as students move toward full alphabetic. Once students move beyond second grade, foundational skills instruction should shift to have a heavier focus on fluency to support students moving through from full alphabetic to consolidated alphabetic. Gonna pause because I said a lot and there's a lot of text on the slide. So I'm just gonna give you a minute to scan that, digest some of it.
I think one thing for me that this is a constant great reminder is the importance of phonemic awareness in pre-K, kindergarten first. It feels like as a teacher, there's a lot of pressure to get to phonics, which is then the association of the sound with an actual letter. But in remembering the phases of development, like you really can't rush the phonemic awareness component of development. And so that's what this always reminds me of.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, definitely can't rush that either. So in addition to supporting movement through the stages, the sequence with which a scope and sequence introduce sounds and spellings matters a lot. Not all letters and spellings are created equal. Quite simply, some are utilized more than others. So a scope and sequence that spends the same amount of time on the letter X as the letter M is not an efficient scope and sequence. A strong scope and sequence allows for maximum useful words to be formed. So imagine you're a 5-year-old eager to learn to read. In the first month of your reading program, I teach you the phonics skills that you see in the first row here. Put in the chat how many words you would be able to make if I taught you these 5 skills. Exactly. So now Sarah's going to put up a second row. Estimation, how many words, or put some words in the chat that you would be able to make. Matt, sad, sat, right. So we were quickly able to generate some useful words. And so you can see a strong scope and sequence focuses on high priority letters first so that students can build words and apply their knowledge of decoding to making meaning from text right away. They also save multiple sound letters, later on as students' ability to recognize bigger chunks of information develops. So we had a few examples of what systematic instruction could look like. Now let's get into explicit. So we know that phonics instruction needs to be systematic and explicit. And the explicit means that every student in a K-2 classroom should be engaged with foundational skills instruction or practice for at least 45 minutes every day. And I know that's a lot of time and there's never enough time for anything, but we're gonna just continue to think about why this is so critical. That means that 45 minutes with one small group on a 5-day rotation just isn't enough sometimes. The best foundational skills programs include whole group, small group, and independent work on all these skills. And explicit instruction means that students have opportunities to hear, say, read, and write a new spelling pattern during the lesson. We know that they have learned that sound spelling they encounter in a text and produce the sound accurately. And when spelling a word, either they self-produce or they've dictated it and produce the right spelling for the sound. So we want students to hear it. So we say several words with target sounds and ask students to identify the words that contain it. For example, if you hear E and you know it, clap your hands. So I would say dog, bee, jump, sheep, book, and expect students to clap their hands when they hear the sound E. Say it. Explain how sound is made. So your mouth position, how you voice it, whether it's a continuous sound or it stops abruptly, and then have students mimic this sound. They can watch each other's mouth or use a hand mirror. And then you ask students to generate words with the sound. There are many ways to do this. They can blend individual phonemes into words and segment words into individual phonemes. Those are both important instructional routines. So as a teacher, I might say, blend these sounds, eat, and then students would repeat, eat, feet. The next row says read it. So we model how the sound is spelled. Then students should read words with the target sound in and out of context, using the target sound and reinforcing previously taught sounds. And then lastly, we want students to write it. They can air write, they can complete a worksheet, they can be writing sentences. I just want them to go through those 4 steps. Explicit instruction in foundational skills also means the teacher introduces the spelling sound pattern orally and in writing. The teacher and student identify and blend words that include the spelling sound pattern. And finally, students have multiple opportunities for practice, reading, writing, and applying the spelling pattern in and out of text. A rule of thumb is that students need at least 5 opportunities to practice a new foundational skill. And this practice can be a combination of speaking, reading, and writing. And as we've talked about earlier, and especially in the first session, some students are going to need more than those 5 at-bats. Practice in phonics should be a combination of in and out of context. For instance, after the 3 spellings for the just sound, students will blend and segment the sound orally, spell and write words that include the sound, and read words that include various spellings. So their practice is happening in a couple of different ways. One important element of practice is applying their newly acquired skills to text. The key is that students need to practice their foundational skills in phonetically controlled texts that require them to decode and not just rely on patterns and pictures. While the key focus of reading decodable text is building automaticity with sound spelling patterns, these texts must be coherent and comprehensible to reinforce the understanding that we read to make meaning of text. A phonetically controlled or decodable reader has fewer pictures and is less predictable than other readers for young students, since the intent here is to ask children to attend carefully to the phonetic patterns they've been learning. This is a sample text connected to a K lesson that you see. Students have been working on digraphs and have just been introduced to the sound spelling pattern. You can see this text is intentionally designed to have students practice and apply the sound spelling pattern they've learned. The text also provides review of prior skills and repetition with new and prior skills. Listening to students read decodable text provides valuable information about their mastery of the targeted skill. If students have not mastered the skill, they will need additional practice. Teachers often use small group time, centers, and transition moments to have students practice with these type of readers. Just gonna pause here and take a sip of water because I'm doing a lot of talking. All right. Some approaches that you may be familiar with, especially many balanced literacy programs, rely on predictable text to get students reading. And these are fundamentally different from decodable readers that students should have the opportunity to practice with as well. Look at the leveled or predictable text on the right and the decodable text on the, sorry, I'm gonna start that over. Look at the leveled text on the left and the decodable text on the right. What do you notice? And feel free to either come off mute and share your noticings or to put them in the chat. What do you notice about the two different texts?
The one on the right has some rhyming words and repeated words.
Thank you. There's larger text on the right, the rhyming, larger text. What else do you notice?
The one on the right is decodable.
Can you say more?
It has like the AD consistently, the word dad, had, an, family, pan, can. So it has the vowel patterns that usually first graders, kindergarten, first graders are learning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank
it. Versus the other one has words like garden, which, my first graders right now wouldn't be able to read that word. They might know they might know has, sun, but the other words they have the are controlled, the IR, ER, AR, they're not there yet at this point. That's what I'm focusing on. At this point, at this school year, they wouldn't be able to read those words.
Thank you. And seeing some thoughts come in the chat as well. The other thing that I think about when I look at these texts is when I look at the one on the left, if we could read my garden, then we're just like reading the same words kind of over and over. My garden this, my garden that, my garden this, my garden that. So that's another thing that I noticed about this. So the bottom line here is that level texts do not support students' foundational skills like decodables do, and you guys hit the nail on the head there. Predictable text relies on the pattern with a lot of sight words and that students are expected to memorize. So that a text that said my garden has. The pictures in the predictable text are detailed to help the student fill in the missing words. So It said my garden had seeds. There was a picture of seeds. My garden has sun. There's a picture of a sun. Decodable texts emphasize specific phonemes that students have already been taught and emphasize phonemes that students have just learned. And then Brenda told us a little bit about how that plays out in her classroom. And the pictures in the decodable text don't give us much specific information related to the words in the text. Though many popular curricular programs may include or promote the use of leveled or predictable text, this type of reading practice is not actually grounded in any research or the brain science of how students learn to read or equitable literacy instruction. Rather than providing students with the opportunity to master what good readers do, which is decode, it emphasizes strategies that weak readers actually use. So reliance on the picture, guessing from context, some of those things that we've seen in the past. So why is it crucial that K-2 classes use decodable text to support students in applying new reading foundational skills? Let's take a look to see what happens if we don't use decodable text. Here we see a kinder level A text. When we analyze the words, thinking of familiar high frequency words and those that are clearly shown through the picture cues, we can see how a young reader might be quite successful in reading this text. In kindergarten, students are able to read all of the picture cues and high frequency words highlighted in blue and green here. If we can animate this side. Thanks. Now on the next slide, we move into second and third grade, and the text becomes more complex. Fewer words here are highlighted in blue or green. So as students struggled with decoding, they became less able to comprehend what they read. To ensure that all students have the support they need to become skilled readers, it's critical that we provide ample opportunities to work with decodable text to build decoding skills and avoid predictable or leveled text and the habits that those texts can reinforce. The texts here are now too complex for students to rely exclusively on picture cues and high frequency words to successfully read through it. Of course, all of this is not to say that students in kindergarten through second grade should only be reading decodable text. Students who are able to pick up reading skills on their own and infer new letter sound correspondences quickly may be able to begin reading trade books and other authentic text earlier on. That said, these students still benefit from the practice and repetition provided by decodable text. Reading authentic text should be done in addition to reading decodable text and not a replacement for the decodable text. Grade level complex text is any text that falls within the appropriate complexity band for the grade. While formal complexity levels begin at second grade, students should have regular access to complex text through read alouds beginning in pre-K. This will support their language comprehension while they're simultaneously building their decoding skills. So we spent time talking about how reading instruction, especially in the foundational skills, should be systematic, explicit, and require practice both in and out of context. I'm going to have an opportunity here to go into breakout groups and discuss the two questions that you see on the site. What targeted opportunities do your students have to practice new sound spellings in and out of context? And when decoding in and out of context, how can culturally relevant images engage students in new learning? Again, going back to that idea of identity that we talked about in the first session and equity. So an opportunity to share what's currently happening in your classroom or school, and then to stretch to how can we bring culturally relevant images into the learning.
Hello, I was in a room, but nobody there was talking back to me.
I'm so sorry. What room were you in?
8, I think. Sorry, I didn't pay that much attention.
Oh, I will.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like every breakout room is back. I know I had a really great conversation with Michelle about what's happening in her classroom. Is there anyone that would like to come off mute and share what they discussed in terms of what type of in and out of context practices you have, or how culturally relevant images can be brought in? Either something you do or something you heard from someone else. Feel free to also drop that in the chat as we're moving through. All right, so I'm gonna now shift to assessment. So disruptions in fluency can result from a variety of factors, including limited phonics knowledge or phonemic awareness, lack of automaticity and key decoding skills, and limited recognition of grade level high frequency words. So to ensure that all of our kiddos become fluent readers, fluency should be assessed frequently using measures that support all three components. So we want to think about just want to acknowledge like assessment, especially when it comes to reading, can be time consuming. It's not something you can do like, here, everyone take your science test. But ideally, it's administered one-on-one about twice a school year in a formal setting, unless you have a formal screener in place that assesses this at your school. Accuracy, rate, and prosody can also be part of informal assessment, and that's not as time consuming. And this is typically faster as you'll listen to students read on a weekly, if not daily basis. You should have a sense of who is and who isn't improving, who needs more practice, and who needs focused attention or a more formal evaluation to determine exactly what isn't working. So we have spent time talking about how instruction should be systematic, explicit, provide practice, and how we need to assess. And now we're going to see some of it in action. So we're going to watch a kindergarten phonics lesson. This is from the CKLA curriculum. And as we're watching this video, looking at the time, we're going to watch about 6 to 7 minutes, 7 minutes of it. I want you to be thinking about how this teacher's lesson reflects the tenets of strong reading foundational skills instruction. So where do you see aligned content? Where do you see explicit teacher-led instruction? Where are kiddos getting sufficient practice in and out of context? And where do you see her making assessments of her kiddos?
All the wiggles out of it, so it can be super still. Okay, super still. Lower it down onto your knees so you have a nice slope. All right, everyone show me where your hands go as for our sound mountain. Beautiful. All right, our first word only has 2 sounds, so everyone lower their hand to their elbow. Are you ready? I'm ready. The first word is, and you're listening, together. Raise their hand and tell me what word we just blended. Tatiana, do. Wonderful. Sound mountain back out. It's a 3 sound word, so hand on the shoulder. Wonderful. Eyes watching, you're frozen. The word is together. Ooh, I like the raised hands and that no one is blurting out. Jeremiah, start down there. Out. We're going to do 2 more. Oh, together. Oh. Raise your hand when you know what all those words have in common. What were they today? Marty? They're all clothing. They're all clothing. If you got the same answer as Marty, can you do your same sign to Marty? Oh, I see lots of friends that have this. We are going to learn a new sound. I want you to practice making that sound with me. We're going to make that sound 5 times. So here's what we're going to do. When I put up a finger, we're going to make that sound together. Naya, I love your magic 5. And Jaden, so check your bodies. Are you ready to learn? Beautiful. All right, you're going to make the sound with me, okay? Here we go. Beautiful. Well, my friends used an inside level 2 voice for that. Tell me, where was your tongue in your mouth when you made that dip sound? Where was it? If you need to make the sound for a minute and then raise your hand when you figure out where your tongue started. Dip. Naraya? Was it the top of my mouth or the bottom of my mouth? It was the top of my mouth. Watch where your tongue is. Oh, all right. So we're gonna be done with our G sounds. Let's see those nice close mouths. Mrs. Weimer is going to say some words that start with that dip sound, okay? I want you to repeat after me. Can everyone say dog? Dog. Dig. Duck. Dull. Now we're going to change and say some words that have the, you're right, that is another word that starts with the sound, Jeremiah. We're gonna do that one today. So we're ready for our next one, Jada. Hold on. We're gonna do some N sounds. Our N sounds are, repeating after me, mad, sad, need. Beautiful. All right, everyone shrug their shoulders for me. Let's get those wiggles out. Kind of switch back and forth. Go super still. Hands straight up. Together. In my lap. Okay. This next part, we really need our ears for, boys and girls. We are going to finish the sentence with a word that starts with the D sound. You may want to go around. Alrighty. I don't want us to shout out the answer. We're going to use our tummy answers for this. So remember, I put my hand in front of my tummy, and if I have the answer, you're going to give me a thumbs up. If you don't know it and you need more think time, your hand is just in front of your tummy. And then I'm going to call on a friend who has your tummy answer up. All right, the first sentence is, I sleep at night. I am awake during the, Jeremiah. You're asleep at night. You're awake during, Courtney?
Day.
The day. Beautiful. Can everyone say day? Let's do another one. Tummy answers are cleared. No one should have a thumbs up because no one knows the answer yet. Another word for mother is mom. Another word for father is, give me your tummy answer. John?
Dad.
Dad. Wonderful. Can everyone say dad?
Dad.
All right, we're ready for another one. An animal that quacks is called a, Kristen, a duck. Everyone say duck. Okay, let's do two more, okay? The next one is, when I go outside, I lock the door. Ooh, I like how Xavier did not shout out and just gave me a tummy answer. Thank you to my friends who were super quiet. Kiss those friends. Beautiful listening ears. I love it. So now we need to learn how to make a picture to go with the duck sound. So we are going to look at the smartboard, boys and girls. And here are those lovely writing lines that we see in our journal. We are going to go around to the left and down from the top. Let's make a medium size. Okay, here we go. A medium, so not too big. Around to the left, down from the top. And now the tiniest one possible. Are you ready? Super little. Around. You guys are ready for our team activity. So we have been learning a lot of different sounds, boys and girls. When I point to the sound picture, I want you to make the sound that it makes. So as a class, what sound do we hear? Oh, it's going to change a little thing. When we do it,
All right, so definitely a lot in there to debrief. So we're going to go back into breakout groups and discuss with our groups what we saw in terms of online content, teacher-directed instruction, student practice, and her assessment, or any differentiation that you saw. So it is 12:09. If you weren't here for the first session, I'm in Atlanta, so I had to do the math to calculate the time difference. We are going to come back at 15 after and share out. Where we have two rooms that are still chatting. I should be back in about 20 seconds. We'll get started then. Doreen, sorry about that you were solo. I think all of our rooms are closed now. Um, so would love to hear from folks. If we just take this category by category, so starting with aligned content, what did you see as a glow? And if you have something to offer this teacher in terms of feedback that you might suggest that she add to her practice, what would that be as well? I know that was part of the conversation in the room that I was in. So starting with aligned content, what did you see her do well? What might you suggest she change?
I think she had the kids really engaged by doing the movements, and she definitely had their attention and had taught them how to do that. So I think that was really great.
Thanks, Amy, and some that was dropped in the chat as well. Anything else? I know that we also have some kindergarten teachers on the line, so anything that you saw that you could relate to or see in your own practice in terms of the sequence and how that supports learning. So the movements and visual physical cues, yep, feedback. All right, let's go to the teacher directed instruction then. How did we see her directly and explicitly teaching or modeling skills or sound spelling patterns? And again, also like what might you suggest that she do differently?
I know we didn't get to see the whole video, and I know part of it was phonemic awareness, and then obviously she had a phonics component because the kids were doing the letter, but we never got to see her actually show the letter to the kids. Was there like our program uses like a speech-based program, so you know she did talk about where their tongue would go, but does the card itself have a picture on it? Does the you know? So we never got to see her actually show a letter with it. So I know there was both. She was doing phonemic awareness and phonics, but we didn't get to see that part.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. You know, we talked about how instruction should be 45 minutes a day, and we definitely only saw a snippet of what she did. How about student practice?
Every student was able to apply the skill that was just learned. Like because it was whole group and because it was with motion, like it wasn't just one at a time, but everybody got to participate.
Thanks, Frank. And then I know someone dropped a comment in the chat earlier about the feedback, but if anyone wants to say more about assessment and differentiation that we saw. I liked your tummy answers. So like all students were able to practice like Brooke said, but that she is able to get that assessment of the entire room at one time. All right. So we've done a ton of learning. Talked about, if you were in the first session, we talked about the brain science behind learning how to read. We've talked about the components of effective instruction. And we are just closing out with a couple of reflection questions. So take a minute or two to think about the questions here. And we'd love to see your answers in the chat. And then I know Mark is going to drop a session survey in there as well. So if you could get that complete, it'd be appreciated. But for now, we'd just love to hear how you're thinking about the science of reading as you're wrapping up this time with us. And if you're feeling like really fired up to share your response with the group, feel free to come off mute and do that as well. Making sure everyone is on board. Investment is definitely a key piece. This being a practice for general education as well, and not just specific to special education. Materials are a big one when they're not aligned or missing. Oh, they are aligned, but you're missing some. That's definitely a challenge. All right. Well, Sarah and I thank you for your time together this morning, especially on a Saturday. Really appreciate everyone joining us, engaging in the conversation, and pushing thinking around what it means to provide equitable instruction for our kiddos. If you have any questions, my contact info is on the slide up here. Feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day.